Once again, this is Nuance, and I am Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter with Chips, also known as Timid. He is, there you go, Takis. He's a hip hop MC in the chair of BLM Tokyo. I got to try me some of those Takis.
You do. These are amazing. So yeah. Wow. Mouth is on fire, but they've got good flavor.
Mm-hmm.
They're loved by the internet. You see them in a lot of videos, and people do things like crush them up and wrap them in things and all this and that. And it's like, where I live, they don't have these things. And so I saw them in the store today. I was just like, let me try that. And so I get it now. I get it.
New? I haven't seen it in the store, I don't think.
It was in Food Lion. So I get it now.
So describe it to me. It's spicy. What does it taste like?
Well, it's spicy. It says fuego. It's hot chili pepper and lime. It's a tortilla chip. And they're kind of like straw shaped. And so you just a burst of flavor. It's really salty too. But I think you'll like them. Like I said, I get it now.
Okay.
Hey, Lixa says, "What you eating?" I am eating Takis.
You know about those Takis?
What you know about Takis?
I've heard of it. I think I've heard the name before. I don't think I've seen it though. Are there challenges, like TikTok challenges, how many you can eat type stuff, or
maybe? I just know the internet seems to love these. And I had never heard, I'd only heard of them on the internet from, viral videos and stuff. And so.
Okay, so I'm asking is what kind of viral videos are made with them?
Oh, like I saw one where this guy was like trying different food, right? And like they say, oh, you should try it by crushing up Takis and then wrapping the mango rolling the mango in the dust and eat it like that. And he's doing that, and he's like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Mango?
Yeah, and I can see it. I could see how that would be pretty awesome. But people doing different stuff like that. Wait till you go to the bathroom. That's what she says.
Uh-oh.
No. Speaking of bathroom, you can call me. I'm one of the Mario brothers today.
Speaking of bathroom, I'm one of the Mario brothers today. Plumber?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Right before we got on the camera today, I went and installed a bidet for my mother.
Okay.
So I bought one of those bidet seats where it has like the wash, like the bidet wash, and you can connect it to any toilet seat. And so I just went in and installed that. So I did my plumbing duties today. And so, yeah. So I'm one of the Mario brothers today.
Okay. Maybe that bidet will come in handy, according to Lixa.
Right? So,
well,
I've got one in Japan because a lot of the places in Japan have them.
Yeah.
But mine is connected to the walls because like it's so common there that most of the bathrooms come with an electric outlet right behind the toilet because they know that people use these are so common in there. And so mine plugs right into the wall, and it has not only the bidet and then the front wash for women, and but what I use it for is the heated seat. Because in the winter, like a lot of Japanese places are not really insulated. And so outside can be just as cold. I mean, inside the bathroom can be just as cold as outside in the winter. And so sitting on a cold toilet seat is horrible anywhere. And so I use that. It's freaking awesome.
Okay. So you might have a new calling, Jay the Plumber.
Hey.
He ran for Congress. Wasn't there a guy who ran for it? Was it Joe the Plumber?
Joe the Plumber. Wasn't it the guy that questioned Obama and then like
he became a Tea Party darling?
Yeah.
Jay the Plumber.
Yeah. Let's say she has the Japanese one. Is that the Toto washlet?
I'm so lost in this discussion. I can't tell you the names of Japanese brands bidets.
Your mom would probably love one.
Okay.
But you'd have to, like most places in America, there's no outlet next to the toilet, like on the floor, because we don't do that here. So you would have to run an extension cord across to wherever the outlet is or have one installed. So that's why it's not really feasible. But this one that I found was a non-electric one, and so you just run it through the thing. But the water is going to be cold, and there's no heated seat, so there's a trade-off.
Okay. Well, speaking of trade-offs, we had a very special guest scheduled for this week. However, she could not make it, and so she is going to appear next week, hopefully. And so we will speak to her next week about the great work that she's doing in the community. In the meantime, it's just going to be us. So we got some topics to get into. We did have 2 poll topics that we put up over the past few weeks that I wanted to cover because last week we didn't get a chance to. And so let me pull up my results because we had 2 interesting ones. The first one, if you recall, Jay, was about the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
Mayor Adams signaling that it wasn't a value that he held, apparently. And so we wanted to ask people, do they believe that the separation of church and state was important to uphold in government? Right. I got some interesting responses on here.
Okay.
So now if you look at the numbers, 407 people answered.
Wow.
94% of them said yes. 6% said no. And let's see some of the comments here. One person here says not important, but crucial. You have one person saying, I think there are plenty of examples in the world that it's not a good idea, but they didn't elaborate as to what they meant by that. Someone says, absolutely, faith is a terrible basis for a government to use to establish policy.
I agree.
Mostly because faith is based on literally nothing, they say.
Okay. That took a hard turn.
Yeah.
I was thinking they were going to go with faith-based extremism.
Right. No, I just don't have any faith in anything. This world is terrible. All cynical all the time, right?
Yeah, right. I hate you and everything that you stand for.
Yeah. I believe any religion should be free to discuss politics as long as they'll pay taxes. That was a point that we touched on also.
Right.
Now, let's see, a bit of a response here. In reply to that particular comment, the Salty Goose on Reddit says, if we're talking America, even if they don't, they should be allowed to discuss it. Freedom of speech means any group can talk about politics and not face legal repercussions. The separation of church and state means that the government doesn't endorse one religion over any other, and that legislation isn't used to enforce religious beliefs. Cough, cough, abortion, cough, cough, gay marriage, cough, cough, trans rights, cough. So
that's a cough.
Yeah, he's got a cough. He needs a cough drop. But they're saying that they believe that religion, meaning, even churches or religious groups, temples, mosques, etc., should be allowed to discuss politics. But the government can't endorse one over the other. But that gets tricky because if you're giving them tax credits, the government is involved in that.
Right.
So I understand freedom of speech, yes, but freedom of speech doesn't mean you're entitled to the tax breaks, right?
Right. And so I think that answers that an earlier one. Like if they do discuss it, then they should lose their tax exempt status.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think it's that cut and dry. I guess it depends also what you mean by discuss it, right?
Right.
I mean, obviously it's fine. Yeah. You start to cross lines campaigning. It's fine when you keep it neutral. When you start saying, don't forget to vote in the election on Tuesday. That's just information for people. That's fine. But when you start getting into we support this candidate over another, or even you start to get on that path when you start talking about how you should vote in terms of issues, right? There's a contentious election happening next month, let's say, and one candidate supports one issue, another candidate supports another issue. Is it appropriate in the church for them to say, don't vote for any candidate who supports that issue? Because then you are telling them, in effect, how to vote.
Right. I think I guess it could still happen, but the danger is, churches will have different views than, various religions will have different views. And you don't want that being involved in the government, running of the government, especially in a place where you've got so many different people with so many different beliefs, and in a country that's supposedly founded on religious freedom, where that allows for everyone to have their own religious beliefs. You don't want that to be the government ruling.
Right. And so if they're giving them tax credits, is that in effect the government speaking on it?
I don't know if it's in effect the government speaking on it, but it's more like, look, you know, we're allowing you not to. Well, do they get tax credits or just tax exempt?
Well, same difference. They're given tax relief from the government, right?
Yeah. You know, it's like, look, you get the special status, but, you know, in order for the special status, you know, you can't get involved in campaigns.
Because that crosses the line into government action. Is that how you're looking at it?
I suppose.
Or government sponsored or subsidized political speech? Because the government is essentially paying the church or the religious group to do what they do, right?
I suppose.
But then you have to ask yourself, I guess, does any entity who receives tax credits or monies from the government have to be politically neutral? I mean, that's the purpose of the not-for-profit laws. You see 501c3s, right? If they are a not-for-profit, it's a specific type of not-for-profit, but they're the type that, for example, is typically eligible for government grants. And so it makes sense that if they're being funded by government sources, that they're not campaigning for a candidate over another.
Right.
At the same time, 501c3 still can talk about political issues. It could.
But what kind of talk about? I guess that brings us back to the original. Yeah. What do you mean by talk about? Right. Well,
for example, here's one. Queenslink. We'll talk about the rally that we just did. Queens Rail Corporation, which is the group behind the Queenslink. It's a 501c3, receives funding from the government. The Queenslink is arguably a political issue, right? The mayor is pushing for the Queen's Way. The Queenslink is saying we want transit to be held for this right of way, and we're going to use our resources to try to get people in government and all kinds of people in power to support this project. And so it is involving itself in politics. Now, what it's not doing is it's not saying we think you should vote for this candidate over that candidate. It's not getting directly involved in electoral politics, but it's getting involved in a political issue.
Right. I think the difference there is that with religion, and with that is it's an individual group. The Queenslink is an individual group, an individual cause. With religion, there are various religions that, you know, and again, people's beliefs vary, and you don't want the government promoting one religion over another. And if they do start getting involved in politics, there's going to be that candidates and whatnot are going to start doing this, promoting this stuff, these other religions over other ones because of whatever votes or whatever support they're going to get. And I mean, that was kind of the original idea. Like, I believe it was Jefferson that kind of floated this idea.
Well, but candidates are free to discuss their religion. It's just that
candidates are, but
when they're in office, they can't push one religion over another as government policy.
Right. But I mean, if you think about it like lobbying groups, right?
Yeah.
You know, and they shouldn't, but lobbying groups come in and they do the support for the candidates or these PACs or support for candidates. When they get into office, they kind of pay that back, right? If we did it with churches and religions, then the candidates would get in office and then they would do things that would favor certain religions that supported them. And then we've got the government showing a preference. And that's something we don't want to get into, even though it's a very, not very good kept secret that, you know, you don't really become president unless you say you're Christian. You know what I mean?
Up until now. I mean, that might change at some point in the future.
Right. At some point in the future. But in theory, we're not supposed to. But in practice, like every candidate pops up, like when Obama was up and when, what was the Republican guy?
Romney,
right? Even with JFK, because he wasn't Christian, he was Catholic.
Well, Catholic is a form of Christian.
Yeah, but
it's Protestant,
right? And so, like, there's this unspoken thing, like you have to prove that you're a Christian. Oh, Romney, well, he's this crazy Mormon, or Obama, he might be Muslim. and it's like you have to prove, no, I'm Christian.
Right. Even McCain had that moment where I always thought McCain got too much credit for it, but I guess because of how negative that election was becoming, they saw him as a bigger man at the time. But remember that person at the town hall he did, and they were like, trust Obama, he's an Arab, the woman said. And he had to say, no, he's not. He's a good family man.
She said he was Muslim.
No. The way she phrased it was, I don't trust Obama. He's an Arab. That's what she said. And he said, no, ma'am, he's not. And he added, he's a good family man. And I'm thinking, so if he was an Arab, he couldn't be a good family man? Like, why is that the response? Right?
Yeah, I remember McCain got credit for it for correcting her inaccuracy, her blatant.
Right. And let's be real, it was his campaign that was largely responsible for those negative attacks. He wasn't saying it himself, but they put the ads on TV. They had Sarah Palin running around saying it.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a monster of his own creation.
Yeah.
And then he got credit for trying to tame that monster that he created.
Right. Yeah, James in the chat. I thought she said Muslim too. I'm pretty sure. I thought she said.
Watch the video. I saw the video not long ago.
Ooh, the gauntlet's been thrown down, James. But yeah, I remember that moment though. Yeah, it was an older woman.
Yeah.
But yeah, like if we're talking separation of church and state, we don't want that to happen. We don't want the government promoting one or the other, and even the ones that might be pushing for it, saying, "Oh no, whatever," because they want things to be a Christian country or whatnot. They still have an issue with, like, say, Sharia law, which would be basically church running government or church principles in government.
Well, not church, right? But that would be, if you wish,
religious.
Yeah.
So
the Quran.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's something also we had mentioned. So when people say that they don't believe in the separation of church and state, do they mean that it should be their own particular religion over another?
And I think that's what it is. It's like they're only thinking from their religion, like, yeah, our religion should run it. But okay, what about if that religion ran it?
Right. And there's also a difference between the government and the electorate, right? So to your point about how all the presidents have been self-professed Christians, but that's also just a reflection of the people who live in the country. I mean, it's been the largest group demographically. And so you would expect something like that. I don't know if that's really separation of church and state, but I guess there's a danger that if the government is speaking on it, it kind of puts the thumb on the scale even more.
Well, I think I think in that regard, one with for the presidential campaigns and such, there's kind of that unspoken pressure for the candidate to be Christian.
Sure.
So even if it's the electorate or not, it's like, regardless of what you are, it's kind of that pressure that you be Christian. And then as far as tilting it one way or the other, again, it could be, what if it was, everyone was Rastafari, like, are certain people going to be upset if they're promoting certain things for that? Or what if they don't? What if whatever this religion believes in, I mean, think again, okay, Muslims and Jews, there's this historical adversarial relationship. And would we want either one to be at the head of the government? Then we're in the mix of a culture war or religious war in the government that, is really something that's more private.
So you think the separation of church and state is important to help us move away from this public pressure that candidates have to be Christian? Do you think they're related somehow?
No, I'm just saying that even though we have this separation of church and state, and this is supposed to be one of the guiding principles of our country, it's unspoken. It's kind of an unspoken thing that we do have this pressure on candidates to be Christian. So there is a government leaning, so to speak, towards one religion over the others.
Right. And so you're saying that, okay, so then you are saying if we didn't have separation of church and state, that effect could be even worse.
Yes.
Then if you have the government saying, well, you must be a Christian.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, any candidate that is not Christian is going to be questioned like more heavily. If they're Jewish, if they're Muslim, whoever, if they're running for president and even if different flavors of Christian, if you're not a specific type of Christian, like we just mentioned with JFK, because I mean, I think he was the first or only Catholic president.
No, he was the first. Biden is the second.
Okay, and so like that was a big deal. Like,
yeah,
even though, like you said, they're still Christian, but no, you're not this type of Christian, and so that becomes a problem.
Right. Well, we do have most people here, like I said, 94% saying that they believe in separation of church and state out of those over 400 responses.
I think it's a good thing. I believe in the separation of church and state too.
So, as do I, and I would hope the mayor would see something like this and maybe rethink his position.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with having your faith, but that's not what you're in office to do. You're not elected to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, on the other question, if we're looking at a possible system-wide collapse, should the government use taxpayer money to bail out the banks?
Right.
On this one, it leans heavily towards no. In fact, 80% no, 20% yes.
That they shouldn't bail out the banks, even if it means a system-wide collapse.
Correct. Now, here are some responses I got off of that. Captured Robot says, one shady bank went under in America. The world's banking system remains solid. Straight Dope 3 on Reddit says, why should banks get to privatize profit but socialize loss? Blank that.
That's a good point.
It's a good one.
That's a good point. The point about the world banks being solid, and I did read that the bank problems that we were having, those two banks failing, some of the ripple effects had reached Japan as well.
For sure.
So, I mean, we're in a very global economy and a lot of things are interconnected.
Right. And
so it could be further reaching consequences besides just in this country. But does that warrant, like the guy said, having, socialized, however you put it.
Socialized loss. So yeah. He's saying that they want to have it both ways.
Right.
Right. The profit is all for themselves, but the loss is our shared responsibility.
Right. And then that's even, and if it's taxpayers, that's people who might not even be your customers. You don't even have money with you. But there was a couple of responses we got on YouTube. One said, yes, the deposits. Yes, but for the deposits, not for the investments, which is what Biden was talking about when he was saying that, we're going to make sure that the depositors are whole, but the investors, they knew it's investment. Any investment's risky. We're not going to cover them. But another one brought up a point that I thought that was kind of interesting. This person said, it's simple. Treat it like any other investor. Valuate the bank. The amount of taxpayer bailout is the percentage of ownership the taxpayer now has in the bank. So if the taxpayer is going to be used to bail the bank out, then we own the bank at that point. However much we use to put in, we own that. So then for profit, we'll come back to the taxpayer. Right.
But how would that work in terms of decision making? I'm assuming it wouldn't if you've got hundreds of millions of people who own this bank now.
Well, it would be instead of individual people, it'd be the government, right? So that would be, say, whatever the valuation is of the bank, we put in 20%, then the government owns 20% of the bank. And so the profits, 20% of those profits go to taxpayers. So then it becomes, and maybe they can eventually pay it off and buy out the taxpayer and get back on their feet.
So when you say it goes to the taxpayers, is it spread out amongst all the taxpayers? Are they actually getting money back, or is it just going into the government coffers they can spend now?
The government coffers, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I would imagine the government coffers, because otherwise you're going to have to cut like 300 million checks to people. So I think it goes into the government coffers and then they use it as if it's taxpayer funds. So I thought that was...
Which in theory should lead to them taxing less because they've got more money now, in theory.
Right. So I think, that was a pretty interesting point that I don't know if I've heard it brought up before. Any company that gets bailed out by the government, okay, well, the government should own a portion of you, proportionate to what they bailed you out for. and so that means now taxpayers have a revenue generating asset. I think that's
in perpetuity.
I mean, I guess it depends on the deal, right?
Yeah.
If it's in perpetuity, or they can say, until, and set up a program where the bank, for example, in this case, the bank could buy out the taxpayer. So if they got 20% ownership, then they would have to eventually buy out the government for that 20% that they own, and then they can be back to their own,
Right.
make themselves whole again.
Okay.
But I think that was a pretty interesting.
It's an interesting idea for sure.
Yeah. So Lixa says, I like that. I'm assuming that she's talking about that. Robbie in the chat says the government will waste the money on something else. That's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think if the taxpayers are on the hook for what this private company's failing is, then we should get something out of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, the government doesn't do all bad things. I want to shout out the senators and assembly members who sent me these certificates that I posted. Really blown away by this, Jay. This is for the Lions Club, and I was mentioned that we worked to establish a local Lions Club here in South Queens. It's not just for Ozone Park, it's for Howard Beach and Woodhaven as well, because there was no local Lions in these areas. And I was adamant myself that we include the greater communities around Ozone Park. So we've got the Ozone Park, Howard Beach, Woodhaven Lions Club. Shout out to everyone who's been a part of this great new club. We started it really during COVID and didn't have much of an opportunity to get it off the ground the way we wanted to until recently. And we did a big induction ceremony, and it was big. In fact, the Lions, as far as I understand, as an organization, is the largest service organization in the world. I believe our induction was the largest ever in our district of the Lions organization. And it was really good because you had everyone from these different neighborhoods coming in and being inducted, standing together and saying, we as a collective now are going to put our heads together and provide services to the seniors of our communities. And so we've got some great initiatives in the works that the Lions are going to be sponsoring. And I'm really excited about that. Now, I received a citation from Chuck Schumer, U.S. Senator, State Senator Joe Adabo, Assemblywoman Stacey Pfeffer Amato, and Assemblywoman Jennifer Rajkumar. I thought that was really cool because up until, I don't know, a few months ago, no one ever gave me any kind of citation. I made the joke that it's good to finally get one that's not from a camera, because that's the citation I usually get. I get a ticket in the mail for going through, not even going through a red light, it's usually going too fast because they lower the speed limits so much and it's hard to get used to sometimes. But this is a good citation to get. So very happy.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's a nice thing. It's a nice thing. You know, it shows that your efforts are not unappreciated.
Right. Yeah. And you put in effort. So, I mean, it's good that they recognize that you're out there and you're doing stuff. So, no, it's awesome. Yeah, for sure. And now the group is excited to get to work on some of these great initiatives. I was also able to sponsor two people. Shout out to Brina and Jennifer, who I was able to sponsor into the Lions, and they're really excited to get to work on these projects too. Did they give you a gift card?
A gift card? No.
Yeah, with the citations, like they should have been giving you a gift card to like Applebee's or something.
They give me a piece of the bank that they bailed out.
Yeah,
I wish.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They should have given you a lion.
I did get, I don't have it with me now, I'm in Maryland actually, but I did get pins. Lions pins, one that said charter member, I think, on it, one that said sponsor on it. So it's pretty fancy.
Nice. No, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do think that services for seniors are lacking. I think that that's certainly an area that we need more of, and it's good to not rely exclusively on the government, but on groups like this who can come in and fill some of these gaps and say, you know what, we're going to take on some of this responsibility ourselves. And part of it, sure, is advocating for the government to do better by our seniors. But part of it is simple, honestly, part of it is let's have a program where we're going to be responsible to check in on seniors in the community. We'll have a whole list of people. This is the person you're going to call and visit, and everyone is responsible. Because we've had some horror stories in our neighborhoods over the past few years where people passed away in their homes and their body wasn't discovered for weeks or months later. Sometimes, they would die without a will, and, who's going to get their assets? Now they have vacant properties, and there's, all this stuff happening. It's really a nightmare surrounding these poor seniors who weren't taken care of. There's no reason that should be happening. So if the Lions can step in and say, all right, we're going to make sure that people can get wills done, and that they're, if they do pass away, we know who's going to be responsible and who's going to inherit their property. And it's not just going to sit vacant in our community for years. We know what's happening. We're on top of all this, and we're going to give people the help that they need while they still are here, right? And sometimes it's just a matter of checking in and calling them, or maybe helping them with their grocery shopping, whatever it is. Small things can go a long way.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a good, these types of organizations are great. I think what I wouldn't want to happen is I wouldn't want the government to rely on these organizations picking up the slack for things that they're not doing. Like,
right.
And I don't remember what it was, but it was in one of the presidential campaigns. It was one of the Republican candidates, and they were talking about health care, and it might have been the one with Obama or whatever. They were trying to get the health care passed, and he was saying, it might have been in the debate, he was saying, oh, basically why do we need this? When my day, the church used to pick it up, and the church
was that Rex Santorum.
It might have been, but the church shouldn't be the one. We shouldn't rely on
it.
Organizations
right. No, absolutely
to do the job of the government.
Perfect example. We started the food pantry during the pandemic. We were so happy to be able to do that, and that was great. And we need more things like that. But the government shouldn't say, okay, now you have food pantries, so we don't have to take care of people, don't have to look after people anymore.
Right? Absolutely right. Yeah. The government should, that should, like I said, those organizations are necessary, they're needed.
Yeah.
But the government shouldn't sit back and okay, well, you got that covered. We're good. No, right. You have a job to do still.
Part of what they can do is fund more programs like that if they are doing the work.
Right. And use them as, to fill that void, but they need to be funding it if they're going to be doing it. But
sure, absolutely. Do everything that they can to help it out.
Yeah. So, but no, that's great. Those types of organizations, like I said, are needed, and really, especially if you're talking about helping the elderly. I mean, it's a big issue. It's going to be even more so in the future as people are having less and less children. It's just like in Japan has a birthing crisis. I know my mother just sent me an article. I think it was a CNN article. There was this one village in Japan that they were rejoicing because they had the first birth there in 25 years.
In a village, the first birth in 25 years.
Yeah, because a lot of villages and small towns are going under in Japan because there are no babies being born, and the country is in such a birthing crisis that they know at some point they're going to come to this reckoning, because there's way more elderly than there are younger people who are the ones that fund the social systems and the healthcare and this and that. People working fund it for whatever. But if you're going to have less people working, less young people, and more older people, you're going to have a big budget deficit. As it stands right now, adult diapers outsell baby diapers in Japan.
In the whole country?
In the whole country.
Wow. Because
there's such a heavy skew as far as population of elderly versus babies being born.
I saw a story not long ago about how a lot of younger people, I think it was mostly young men in Japan, were just giving up on trying to find girlfriends and get married eventually. They just weren't even interested anymore.
A lot are, and women too. They're just one of the factors is, things are getting more expensive. For one, some of the stuff people have said they've kind of commoditized different parts of the relationship. So you can go to, if you want female company, right, you can go to a hostess bar, right? You go in, you pay like $100 or whatever, and $50, wherever the place is, depending on the type. And, a nice looking young lady sits with you for like an hour and drinks with you and basically tells you how awesome you are. Some places they have cuddle cafes where like if you just need to be held, you go in and you pay an hour for you lay in a bed and someone cuddles you. And so people say that commoditize different parts of relationship, and you mix that with the culture that's already a little bit conservative on the surface and very shy and non-confrontational and this and like this. And so people get into these bubbles of wanting to be so, or just do their own thing. And they think a relationship's kind of a headache.
Is it possible that social media has a role in that, in terms of making people more to themselves and not interacting with others as much in person?
I think the role that it would play, I don't think it's the cause, but I think it's an outlet to maybe fulfill that loneliness void, right? So I think even if social media didn't exist, I think the problem would still be there. But now with social media, they might have less of depression. They might have less of loneliness because they can fill their mind with some other activity or get involved in something else. But I think I think part of the culture was going this way anyway, where people are just alone and separated, right, and don't want to be bothered. Or a big thing in Japanese culture is not being a bother on other people. So if you've got some issue, like for example, elderly committing suicide is kind of an issue, as they think, okay, look, I'm old. I don't want my family to have to take care of me. And so they'll go step out in front of a train and commit suicide to not be a burden on someone else.
Right. You also mentioned that there is part of the workplace culture there where they'll move a young professional to a different city hours away potentially. That's very hard for a family to keep up with, I'm sure. I'm sure maybe people will say, look, why would I want to get married if this is what I have to be subjected to in the workforce?
Right. And that's another factor. And it's not even just young professionals. I mean, all ages. And then the company would just be like, okay, well, you're going to go live here for 2 years. Okay. And then I'm going to be here for 2 years. Then right. Here. And so if you've got a family or you're trying to start a family, it makes it more difficult.
That's what I mean. If you're younger, you might be thinking, hey, maybe I shouldn't be starting a family now because what kind of pressure am I going to be putting on them if this is going to be subjected to in the workplace?
Right. So it's very common for, say, a family, husband and wife, they have a child, and then the wife and the child live in their family home that they've bought, and the husband lives in some other part of the country, and he's being moved every couple of years, and he comes home, on the weekends, or he comes home a couple of times a month, and it's just so common that a lot of companies have, just like you might have a commuting allowance to commute to work, and they pay for like your train fare or whatever. They have, this can be part of the package. Like, yeah, we pay for you to go home twice a month to visit your family, type of thing. Like it's really crazy. And so some of the younger generation is like, look, that's ridiculous. I don't want to do that. And so they shun some of these types of companies or ask about it, but it's a small minority that's doing that. So,
well, I guess it's going to take more people speaking up to see the change that we want to see.
Absolutely.
And speaking of that, I've been very vocal about this piece of legislation that I believed in called the State of Origin Bill. I even went on Democrats Abroad's forum that they did via Zoom. I spoke about it, and we recapped it here a few months ago whenever we did that, where I got a very popular room going. Remember, we broke off into these private rooms after and allowed people to join my room, talk about my proposed legislation. And then the host of the panel from Democrats Abroad put the question out to the people who were there asking, okay, so what are you going to do? What are you promising to do to take action as a result of this meeting? So you're not just leaving this meeting and not following up on it. And a lot of people said they're going to support Mike in this endeavor to get this bill passed in New York. And that was very cool. Well, I've been speaking with an assembly member about sponsoring it, and we've been going back and forth about language and different logistics with it. It turns out through our communications, we discovered that the bill was not only introduced, but it passed and was signed by different people, right? By a different assembly member and another senator who we weren't expecting to carry it. But it's law now. And this is kind of a shock to us because we were trying to figure out the steps that we would need to take to get it introduced, what needed to be changed in the draft and how we're going to go about this. And we found out, no, wait a minute, it's actually already law. It's something that I've been advocating for years. And so it's quite possible that that idea that I had put out there sparked this. But nonetheless,
you've been jacked.
Well, it's not. Yeah, I mean, it's not even about that. Well, what it is if you are jacked with a gun, now you'll know where that gun came from. And that's really what the point of it is. The point of it is to show where the guns are coming from that come into New York.
Right.
Of course, there's this talking point that's out there that gun laws don't matter because criminals are going to get them anyway. And so the argument goes, gun laws only affect the law abiding, right? Because on its face, you might think, okay, they're the ones who would care about following the law in the first place. If you're a criminal, you don't care about what the gun law says, you'll do what you want to do. That's what the argument says. It's not really based in reality in terms of how the world operates, because what we find is that the laws actually do have a lot to say about the availability of the guns that are out there, because the guns have to come from somewhere. They're trafficked into New York. And so
and that was one of the things. That was one of the excuses that these people who are opposing gun regulation would say, well, New York's got strict gun laws, and look what happens up there with gun crime. Exactly.
So if people are going to say that, isn't it useful then to know exactly where the guns are coming from? So we know what's happening here, what the actual reality is. Is it just a talking point that the gun laws don't mean anything? Or are they meaning something? Because we have seen data even before all this showing that 85% and up of the guns recovered in crimes in New York came from other states. So we had seen that already. And we had seen what the biggest culprits were in terms of just raw data. But this takes a step further.
States that were lax on gun laws.
Exactly. Virginia was a big one. North Carolina was a big one. Even Pennsylvania was up there. But if you look at these laws, it is certainly easier to go into a store or anywhere in those states and buy a gun. And that's what was happening. The guns were coming from a lawful source originally and being trafficked illegally into the state. So what this database now creates is an opportunity for people to go online and look at not just the raw data in terms of overall numbers, but each individual crime. If the gun is recovered and we know this gun came from a certain state, the state now has an obligation to put that online and show you where that gun came from. And so this becomes a very personal thing, because if a gun is used to victimize someone on your block, your neighbor, God forbid, someone in your family, yourself, whatever it is, you can now go online, or you'll be able to once these come out. You'll be able to go online and check exactly where that gun came from, what state. And actually, it went a step further, county of origin too. And so hopefully this is going to be very illuminating and be able to have a real conversation, because we've talked about this frustration that it's fine to have different perspectives on what should be done, what the policy should be. We do that all the time. That's why we call this nuance. We like looking at things from different angles. That's great, and that's what we should be doing. But in order to get to where we want to go, you need to even have that conversation productively, we have to start with the same set of facts. We can't all have our own different ideas as to what the reality is, what the facts are, because then we're not going to be able to solve any problems. We're going to be solving two different problems, and we're just going to be arguing with each other. So let's actually see what the data shows, and let's put it out to the people. Let's make it very transparent so that we can then have a conversation on what the policy should be based on what we know the facts are.
Absolutely. And then if, like you said, for example, Virginia, there was a lot of guns that were coming into New York from Virginia. You've got the data, and you can point and say, look, Virginia, look what's happening here. Like, you need to do something.
Right. So, yeah. And you could, for lack of a better word, shame these other states, other places. Let's say someone comes in and commits a massacre in New York. We want to know where that gun came from. The public wants to know. If it came from Virginia, if it came from South Carolina, wherever it happened to come from, well, we should go back to those states and say, hey, you might want to change your laws because your guns from over there are massacring our people.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I know people are going to say, well, people kill people, the guns don't. But it's about the availability of these weapons. Do we want the criminals? Because everyone says that. The criminals have the guns. Do you want them to have the guns?
Right.
And if you don't want them to have the guns, then you need to decrease that availability.
Right. So, absolutely. No, it's great. So it sounds like it's good thing the law's in there, and hopefully it gets replicated nationwide,
Yeah.
and then becomes even more of a useful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if we're seeing that illegal guns are coming in from states where it's easy to get them legally, then we know that in order to stop people committing crimes from having them, we should affect these laws, because you can still have laws that enable law-abiding people to get them, and people who have a right to get the people who should. Like, we're not saying that there should be no Second Amendment. I'm not saying that.
No.
I'm saying that we want to keep them out of the hands of people who we don't want to have them, who are going to do bad with them.
And it shows then, definitively, you've got data definitively that shows that there needs to be some sort of a cohesive national agreement in legislation. If you're going to a place where it's very easy to get a gun legally, they can very easily get it. And then they're taking it somewhere where they have stricter laws. And you can see that, okay, well, here's a weak point. Now we have a case to make something that's uniform across the nation so that these things don't happen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I do want to shout out Assemblywoman Richardson, who I used to actually hang out with a bit in Albany when I was working in the state Senate. Sometimes we would hit up these after hours cocktail parties, and a group of us would go and we would hang out at these events. And so definitely shout out to her, and also Senator Mike Gianaris, who's local. He comes into Ozone Park a bit, actually. They were the sponsors of this legislation.
Well, yeah, shout out to them. That's what's up.
So yeah, no, very good. And the reports have to be published quarterly, and so when the first one is available, I'm looking forward to seeing it, and then maybe we can look at it together on here and report.
Now, do you know if it's going to be like a searchable database online?
Well,
you go in, you put in like the serial number, and then it gives you the thing to anybody, or is it going to be in a like you said, a quarterly report type of thing?
It's a quarterly report. I don't know how searchable it's going to be. It has to be published on their website, and so I'm sure it's able to be searched, but I don't know how user friendly they're going to make it when they program it.
Okay.
So we have to see.
Question in the chat or comment: aren't a lot of the guns that are here illegally are purchased in gun conventions? I thought I read a while ago that they're mostly buy guns in gun shows, or is it in the modified parts? Like the stocks, the bump stocks and whatnot.
Yeah. That's part of it too. But the thing is this, even at a gun show, you're supposed to follow gun laws. I mean, and there were loopholes and all that there was an effort to close all those gun show loopholes that were out there about background checks, all that kind of thing. But the goal here is to have consistent legislation, consistent laws, so that even if you're buying a gun at a gun show, you're not bypassing any useful gun legislation that we have. I mean, we don't want anyone to be able to just go to a gun show and get a gun that they wouldn't be able to get at a store.
Right.
But the fact remains, most of these guns, data shows, come from other states, so it's not like they're all coming from gun shows here in New York.
Right. And it's funny, like I think there's some videos online and people can check to get guns in Japan. Like, Japan is pretty much a gun-free country, but people can buy guns. Like, it's not like they're legal, but you have to go through certain steps, right? You have to take like a written test, and you have to do this is with the police department. You have to go through classes with the police department on how to responsibly shoot the gun and store the gun, hold the gun, all like that. There's a background check. There's safety courses that you have to take that teaches you about maintenance and inspection, and all that. And then, of course, I don't think automatic guns are allowed, but like, this is even just to get a regular hunting firearm. Like, but you have to do these courses and stuff with the police department. Right.
And obviously you see less gun violence in areas where there are fewer guns laying around, right?
It's very rare that there's gun violence. Even the police don't really carry guns in Japan. Gun violence is very, very rare. That's why, what was it, last year when the ex-prime minister was assassinated with a gun? That was very, very surprising.
Now, where did that gun come from?
See, that's what's, it's kind of, I guess interesting, even though it's a bit morbid to say interesting in this case, but he was former self-defense forces member, so it would be like their military, and he built it. So he didn't purchase it. So he made that gun. He put it together. So
that's something that also has become an area of concern. I had a conversation with someone a while back saying 3D printers were going to basically render gun laws obsolete because it doesn't matter. You can ban buying a gun from the store or anywhere else, but someone can just make it themselves now.
Right. And people have been kind of able to do that all the time, right? I mean, what was it? Potato guns and what they call them, zip guns or this and that. I mean, there's to some degree, but with a 3D printed gun, you can do that much easier, and it's not metal, so it won't trip up metal detectors.
Again, we have to look at the stats here. Are most guns used in crimes in New York 3D printed? No.
No, not at the present time.
Right.
Not at the present time. That could change in the future, but not at the present time.
Right. Well, speaking of what could change in the future, the New York State budget, right? We're in budget season, and there was a massive rally today, 17,000 seat arena, in fact, for healthcare workers. In fact, Rakim and Dougie Fresh were performing. They were at this rally saying that the governor needed to restore funding to healthcare in the budget, because in her executive budget, which is her proposed budget, there was a cut in some of that funding. And so they're saying that the funding should be restored in the budget that actually gets passed. So it's up to the legislature now to put together their budget, got passed through both houses and sent back to the governor to be signed. 1199 in particular was the spearhead of this rally, because obviously they're very concerned about the healthcare workers, but they're saying that the Medicaid reimbursement rate should increase 10% for hospitals and 20% for nursing homes, and $700 million for safety net hospitals should be restored. The current budget that the governor proposed, as I said, cut this funding. So we'll see if it gets back in. I don't think it should be cut. I think that, as we were talking about earlier, we have issues with seniors and others not being properly cared for. I think healthcare needs to be at the top of our list in terms of our priorities.
Right. And you know, it just kind of boggles the mind that healthcare, especially for seniors or something like that, like this is even something that we just have to fight over.
Yeah.
Like, why is there a fight over it? And I know what it is. It's more about who's to pay for it. It's more of an economic issue. But you would think as a country, we would be trying to have the best system possible. It's just kind of crazy.
1199 President George Gresham said, "We do not want to be here today. We'd rather be doing what we do best, and that is giving good health care. But we are here because we demand the resources to do the right thing." Yeah, and that's, again, what we were talking about before. The government's responsibility is to make sure that things are funded the way they need to be so that the people can do the work, whether that's healthcare workers, whether it's people in nonprofits providing services to seniors or others. The government needs to step in and make sure that people can do their jobs and the services that they're trying to provide. And oftentimes it's a matter of funding, right? And when we cut this funding, the people can't deliver resources to the folks, and the community suffers.
Absolutely.
So,
no, I mean, and listen, the funds, it just needs to be allocated from different places. And not like we're hurting on funds. I mean, in some way we are, but you know, we just dropped billions on Ukraine and other wars that we've been doing that we were doing for 20 years. Like we need to change our priorities here.
Yeah, well, that is federal though, and this is New York State.
But some of that they get money from the federal government as well.
And it is a matter of, like you said, priority here. And to be fair, it's easy for us to
Sure.
quarterback this from where we
Absolutely.
sit, because if we say, hey, we want money for everything,
Right.
there are tough decisions that need to be made in the
Right.
budget, and sometimes you do have to make cuts, right? But again, what is the priority here? Certain things I think should be off limits to the extent possible. Healthcare, education, right? We saw CUNY and colleges education being cut in New York. We saw even proposed tuition hikes. Those are dangerous because you're passing costs on to people who can't afford them. And I think healthcare and education really need to be preserved to the extent possible, so that, yes, that we pay taxes where our tax dollar is going. I think that's where we want them going, right? We want them going in certain areas. We don't want to hit the people with that bill, right? Like in the case of CUNY, you're expecting the people, the struggling students, to have to come up with their families, to come up with more money to go to school. That's not a good thing, right? We're taxing the people, we're collecting this revenue. Let's put it to good use. All these tickets that we're getting in the mail, right? Let's at least make sure that our tuition isn't going up and that our healthcare is funded.
Yeah, absolutely. And overall, it helps overall, right? If we have better healthcare system, and actually, in absence of healthcare, not absence of, in addition to, there needs to be more health education, and that needs to be taken more seriously. So we have less people that are needing to go through the education system and using that money.
Yeah.
But for education, wait, did I just say? I meant health, but yeah, for the education system, I mean, listen, we have brain drain, or we have these positions that are coming up that we don't have the workers to be able to fill because we don't have the adequate qualifications, people without adequate qualifications, just like I think it was in 2008 when everything, people lost jobs and all this and that. And it wasn't that there weren't jobs available, is that we just didn't have people that were qualified to fill those jobs. And that's going to come down to education. If we make it more difficult to get education, then we're going to have a less qualified population, and either people are going to come in from other countries or those jobs are going to go other places.
Yeah. And I know someone's going to say, oh, the tickets come from the city, not the state. Listen, it's a matter of priority.
Yeah, it's the idea. It's the idea of it, right? So I mean, what was that in the chat? Medicare.
It applies to the city as well, by the way.
Sure. Yeah. So.
So there was a comment in the chat.
Yeah. So Medicare reimbursement rates are dictated by the federal government. And it says, I think we need to demand all level of governments need to be audited and see how much money comes in and how much is actually spent. I think that's necessary too.
Right.
It should be by an independent body. It shouldn't be the government auditing itself unless it's something that's not going to be influenced by, elected officials and their budgets.
Well, per city and state, 1199 is calling for a $2.5 billion investment from the state into healthcare, which would include increasing the Medicaid reimbursement rate 10% for hospitals and 20% for nursing homes, restoring $700 million in funding for safety net hospitals. They say the governor cut in her proposed budget, increasing that funding by another $600 million, fixing reimbursement rate disparities and continuing investments made in last year's budget to ensure higher wages for home care workers. What do you think about Dougie Fresh and Rakim at this rally? It's an interesting choice.
Yeah, I'd be interested to find out who booked it, why, how they got involved. But I mean, look, they have these types of rallies, these types of pushes, these types of campaigns get celebrity endorsements. These are homegrown New Yorkers. So
that was really my question. Are they celebrities at this point in time? I mean, I like it. I'm all for it. But
right.
It's not something I would expect. I mean, it was a big crowd, right? 17,000 healthcare worker rally. Tish James was there, Rakim and Dougie Fresh.
Well, let's think about it this way. Like, I get what you're saying. Like, they're not really in the mainstream these days, but let's think about it. Maybe the people who are making these decisions would be the people who grew up on Dougie Fresh and Rakim. And so that would be a big plus for them to see them come out, right? Maybe those guys, someone in their 50s or 60s, seeing like Future come out or Lil Yachty or somebody, it means nothing to them. They see Rakim.
So are you saying that the average age of the healthcare worker is higher?
It could be, but I'm thinking maybe the people that are in charge of these budgets.
People in charge of these budgets. Oh, so you're saying that they're trying to influence like Kathy Hochul by having Rakim come out?
Or who's going to be not influence, but who's going to what am I thinking about here? Appeal to them, right? I think that could be a possibility. That could be a possibility. Like, you know
what? Carl Hasty is definitely a hip hop head, Speaker of the Assembly. So I could see him enjoying.
How old is he?
Appearance. Oh, let's look it up. He's definitely in the age group that would know Rakim.
Right. So that could be a possibility.
He's 55.
55. So Rakim would have been someone that he might have, if he's into hip hop, he would have known about.
And he's also from the Bronx, and so the home of hip hop. He goes, he throws up the X on all the shows. When Caucus Weekend, they bring in some old school rappers often.
But Future, might mean nothing to him, even though to the younger crowd, like, they'd be like, Rakim who? Future, that's the dude. So that could be
saying now that older hip hop acts can experience a resurgence based on political influence because they can reach people of a certain demographic who tend to be in power.
Potentially. I mean, didn't we just see what was the thing you went to and Redman was at?
Yeah, Caucus Weekend last year. Redman was there giving a speech.
Why Redman?
Well, I'll tell you why Redman, because the issue was marijuana.
Oh, okay, Redman.
Yeah, so there you go. And
Redman, Method Man, Snoop Dogg.
Well, no, but Redman in particular not only is investing in marijuana business, but he's part of a political party that they formed.
Right.
Centered on this one issue, right? It's a one issue party. And he said it during his speech that one day they might put someone from that party in the White House, even like they're dreaming big.
Right.
It's like an anti-prohibition for a marijuana party.
Right. So who knows why they put it on? I was just thinking that could be one option. They're thinking, okay, look, the people that are making decisions are going to be older. Let's get someone that's going to appeal to them. That could be one way.
There are a lot of young people in office too. They're not all old.
But by and large, they're older.
At the state level, I don't know if that's true. In New York City, I mean, around the state, maybe. I don't know. I think there's a lot of young people in office in New York State now.
Okay. Maybe it just was in their budget range. That was like, okay, this is all we've got. Who can we get?
I don't know. Maybe George Gresham, the president of 1199, is a big old school hip hop head. It wouldn't surprise me in the least.
Or it could be, whoever was organizing this, you've got a budget and you're going to create your own wish list. Like, this is who I want to see. So, that's
the biggest crowd that Rakim and Dougie Fresh have performed for in years.
I don't know how many people were there.
17,000, they say.
Wow. I don't know. I mean, they still tour, but it's probably smaller venues, probably not 17,000. Although there are festivals that could see those numbers. So
who knows? I like it. And, hopefully we do get that funding in the budget.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully Dougie Fresh came out and said they had 6 minutes to make a decision.
And as we said earlier before we came on, he did not invent the beatbox. So he is credited with being an innovator of it.
Right. That article said he was the inventor of the beatbox, right? No.
I thought that was George Santos.
It absolutely was George Santos. He also invented the scratch as well.
That's right.
He was the first MC to spit rhymes on stage. And I think he did it while he was being the first person to breakdance ever. So,
what was that line? There was a song called Old School by the Cunning Linguists. I think it went something like, I sipped fine wine with Einstein back in the day. MC Squared was his stage name, and he rocked gray braids.
I don't remember that line, but
maybe, Einstein was the first MC.
That could have been. Who knows?
So, all right. I wanted to get into this topic because we put it in the caption. And that's about prosecutors having liability from civil suits. And should that change, right? There was a story that broke where a memo was uncovered. In fact, more than one memo. And we can maybe even put it on the screen to show it for those watching the video here. In the DA's office. And it relates to choosing members of a jury, right? So when the prosecutors are making their case, they have to pick a jury along with the defense. They choose jurors. And there are, of course, strategies involved, and both sides are able to strike prospective jurors, and they can do it for all kinds of reasons, right? You don't have to give very specific, it's not, you need a damn good compelling reason. It's just, you have discretion to pick your jury. But with that said, you're not supposed to strike jurors for discriminatory reasons. You're not supposed to do it on the basis of race or religion. You can discriminate against someone you think is going to be bad for your case, and maybe in other ways, but not when it comes to race or religion. And there's a name for that. It's called Batson. Yeah, Batson violation. The Batson violation is referring to the practice of discriminatory jury strikes, right? It's a civil rights violation to do that. So there was a memo that was found, and this was in Queens, where they were trying to keep certain jurors off of cases. And let's see if I can do a share screen so you can see this actual memo. Because it starts off in a manner that you might expect it to, and then it takes a turn.
Yeah.
Here we go. Okay, so you can see that this was actual handwriting from a memo that was found in the files of the Queens Assistant District Attorney. It says no sympathetic types. Okay, don't get carried away with law and order types. Then it says no Hispanics, in parentheses, unless citizen from other country will hate bad reputation of American Hispanics. And the next one, it said no Jews, it looks like, but it's crossed out. And instead it says no Italians if the defendant is Italian. That triangle is a Greek letter delta, which is D for the defendant. So it's shorthand that you'll see lawyers use. No Italians if the defendant is Italian. And so obviously what they're getting at there is they believe that if the defendant is Italian, an Italian juror would be less likely to convict that person.
Right.
But it's very interesting that they chose that. They crossed out the Jews. But why are we focusing on Italians here? I mean, wouldn't this logic apply for any ethnicity?
Right. You would think so. But there's what's so specific about Italians that, that's why they'd have to write that on there.
And then no Hispanics unless citizen from another country will hate bad reputation of American Hispanics. So that seems to be saying that if you had a citizen from another country, you can put them on the jury because they are more likely, according to this, to vote to convict an American Hispanic because they think they have a bad reputation.
Yeah. And so the article is saying that these prosecutors are still on the job.
Yeah, well, they're saying they're not going to speak on it. The DA's office will not speak on this because there's ongoing litigation. I know that there's been lawsuits filed. Some law professors are actually really pursuing this hard.
Right.
Now, that also led to the question about liability because prosecutors are shielded from being sued as it relates to their conduct or potential misconduct as a prosecutor. We wanted to ask that question, like, should that still be a thing? Should you have that liability, that immunity from liability, rather? Or should people be able to sue a prosecutor for their misconduct?
Now, let me ask, what's the thinking behind shielding prosecutors from this misconduct allegation or being sued for misconduct?
I think it's, well, first of all, the way that a DA's office is structured, you've got the district attorney, but then the people who are actually prosecuting these cases are just hired by the district attorney, by the DA. They're called ADAs, right? Assistant district attorneys. And so when you see a memo like this being circulated, it's in the files of one of these assistants, ADAs. And so the first question you would ask is, okay, so whose liability would it be? The ADA is working on behalf of the DA, would the prosecutor, in this case, it would be Melinda Katz, would she be sued every time an ADA acted in a wrong way, or are we only going to give it to the ADAs? I think the liability rather to the ADAs. I think the bigger question is, are we going to essentially handcuff them from doing their job by giving them the constant fear of being sued? Because a prosecutor is going to be a very unpopular person with people that they're prosecuting, certainly, right? And so what if they prosecute someone and there is an acquittal? Is that always going to lead to a lawsuit? A prosecutor is always going to be sued every time they don't get a conviction, or is it going to stop them from taking chances as a prosecutor and doing what they need to do? I mean, you understand, as a lawyer, we have this adversarial system where there's the prosecution and the defense, not just in criminal case, though. It's in civil cases as well. I focus on civil litigation, plaintiffs and defendants. But lawyers are representing the best interests of their clients. Do we want the lawyer to be sued freely for a strategy that they take in a case? Now, I'm not saying the answer is no, that they shouldn't be sued, but I think we need to be careful with it and maybe draw some very clear parameters here to define what would constitute misconduct that would be worthy of a lawsuit. But I think, to your question of why there is this immunity, I think there's just this general idea that we have this adversarial system. The government has to make its case. The other side has their own lawyer, in theory, right, trying to say that the government didn't make its case, and the system plays out that way. But we don't want to make all lawyers afraid of pursuing a case or defending a case because the lawyer might then get sued. Typically in our system, the lawyers aren't the ones getting sued unless they're themselves committing torts or breaking a contract or doing something themselves that's unlawful. But the lawyer is really there to represent the interest of the parties, not to be the party.
Right. I think I understand that point. I think on the other side, you would think if they are free from any sort of accountability like that, then there's the very real possibility of misconduct, because they've got like a free pass basically to do whatever. Yes,
which is why I think that it doesn't really make sense to say that there should be absolute immunity, right? I think that the parameters just need to be defined, right? Because you don't want a lawsuit against every prosecutor, every ADA, after every case. I mean, even if you get a conviction, I'm sure you'll get people who are very upset who say, you know what, they screwed me over. They did something they weren't supposed to do.
Right.
Whatever it is. Oftentimes, even it might be their own attorney's fault. Like, for example, refusal to take the stand, right? And sometimes a lot of blame goes around where a criminal defendant does have a constitutional right to testify on his or her own behalf. Oftentimes, their own attorney doesn't want them to for the purpose of the case.
Right.
Maybe that's an issue with your own attorney. Do we want them to sue the prosecutor and allege that the prosecutor somehow was in cahoots with the judge and prevented them from testifying or whatever? You can definitely see a lot of like wacky stuff like that happening.
Sure. I mean, what was it? I mean, we've seen news reports and whatnot of cases where people who were incarcerated for things they didn't commit, and they might have been the prosecutor or whatnot, was trying to force a conviction for whatever reason they're trying to do, and they might have had evidence that they specifically chose to ignore so that they could get that conviction or whatnot. Now, if they're free from liability once this is found out that this person was, didn't commit this crime and this is what happened behind the scenes, like, they're able to just walk off and with no accountability, that leaves them open to do it again.
You need accountability, absolutely. But another wrinkle in this is that they do work for the government, right? So they are government agents, and there are remedies. If you're falsely convicted, for example, you can go and get your conviction overturned.
It takes time.
You could also sue the government in certain cases, right? But
it takes time.
Oh, absolutely. But this would take time too. We're saying now potentially the prosecutor would be open to liability. That would take time too. You file a lawsuit against anyone. 5 years, 10 years, it can still be going on. But as it stands now, you do have recourse, but that recourse is from the government on the whole, not the individual prosecutor who works for the government as an employee.
Right.
And let's be real. If you want to file a lawsuit, and you oftentimes see things like this where someone is wronged, a family maybe comes in and files this big lawsuit against a jurisdiction and recovers a large sum of money. They're not going to get that most likely from an ADA working in the Queen's DA's office for a pretty small salary.
Right. But just like, let's take a real world example. What was her name? The prosecutor of the Central Park Five, Farstein?
Mm-hmm.
And she was criticized for her handling of the case. She was accused of coercing confessions from these guys and ignoring evidence that suggested that they were innocent. Now, they all went to prison and served time and eventually were exonerated. And she's even to this day defending her actions, but they were exonerated. And she ignored certain evidence that suggested their innocence. Should there not be some sort of recourse for them against her for not doing her job the way it should have been done, for ignoring evidence like that?
No, there definitely should be. And the DAs, the government in general, right, should have mechanisms that protect against that. And if nothing else, don't keep them in their jobs anymore. Right? Don't allow them to keep doing that. Right? There should be accountability for wrongdoing. Absolutely. But again, I'm not saying that applied in that particular scenario, but when you have this adversarial system, there are choices that need to be made. And sometimes, especially if you're on the losing side of it, you might see it as misconduct when it's really just you being an advocate for your client. In this case, it would be the government. You're on the other side. You're an advocate for your client, maybe who's the defendant, and you're showing that the government didn't meet its burden. And sure, there's arguments back and forth about, are you doing the right thing? But it doesn't mean that it's always misconduct. So I think you need to be careful. The Supreme Court in 1976, in the case Imbler v. Packman, created the immunity against prosecutors because they're worried that lawsuits would impede prosecutors' ability to do their job. And it was supposed to be to serve the public trust and ensure the proper functioning of the criminal justice system. And so, it is a system we have. Like I said, it's one side versus the other. And especially when you're dealing with prosecutors, people in the criminal defense context are going to be very upset. And I could definitely imagine if it's the prosecutor, they're going to want to. And think about this, even if they were convicted, because if it's an acquittal, you might think you have more of a reason to do it.
Right.
Maybe you don't. Maybe it just means that the government didn't meet its burden. It, again, doesn't mean it's misconduct. Maybe it means that the evidence wasn't there. It doesn't mean that they were wrong to prosecute, right?
Absolutely.
But what if you were convicted? Then you might be sitting in a cell with all the time in the world. Yeah, maybe you're going to be filing off lawsuits against everyone.
Right, absolutely. I mean, if every case had 2 or 3 lawsuits that followed up because of suing the prosecutor for whatever, the system would just never work. There does have to be some way that there's accountability involved.
So maybe the answer
should be above that.
Yeah, maybe the answer isn't the civil liability unless it rises to the level of, I don't know, gross misconduct or some standard that's clearly defined, not just your everyday negligence, let's say. Maybe instead, the focus should be on holding them accountable in the form of losing their job, disciplinary records being shown, and files on them, strikes against them, and being fired if they reach a certain level.
I think, that sounds good. I think, to me personally, for example, in the case I brought up with the Central Park Five, I think there should be jail time. You're talking about putting people away and taking away their freedom. Right. You don't just ignore something just so that you can win the case. Your goal shouldn't be, I just want to tick this box of winning. I should want to be putting away someone that actually did something wrong. If they didn't, I shouldn't want to put them away. And
that's an important point that we should make, because yes, as we said, there is this adversarial system and they are lawyers trying to win a case, but there is an additional obligation on a prosecutor to take exculpatory evidence into account and not to ignore that. Because their duty to win the case is dwarfed by their duty to do the right thing for the people.
Right. And
let's not forget, it's the people versus such and such. The people. And so it isn't about this prosecutor's record of getting a conviction. It should be about doing the right thing for the people, because the people have an interest in, number one. Number two, the person standing accused definitely has an interest in that. And it's a violation of their rights for the government to come in and lock them up at all costs, even when the government knows that certain evidence might prevent them from being shown to be guilty.
Absolutely. So sounds like a poll question of the week to me.
Yeah, well, let's do it. So the question of the week is, do you believe that prosecutors should continue to enjoy immunity from civil liability as it relates to their conduct as prosecutors?
All right. Got another long one there, but
That's not too long.
yeah, but it's a good question. I think it's something that, and to be fair, the person who you read off the name of who introduced this immunity
It was a Supreme Court case.
Okay. And I'm sure it was probably put into place, or I would hope it was put into place under, good intentions. But it could be time to reevaluate it, or to look at a better way of doing it, so that there is fairness, so it doesn't open up the lane for misconduct.
Right. Right.
We've already got a no in the chat for the poll.
No, they should not continue to enjoy the immunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here was a note also, which was very controversial. And this, you see things like this and you start to say, wow, something needs to change in a culture here, whether that's liability, whether that's just accountability, like we said, losing their jobs. Why are people like this still working there?
Right.
That's a troubling question. So let me put the share screen back on here, because this other note was found. Good B neighborhoods. You see, here it is. You see that? Clearly the B means black there. Cambria Heights, Hollis, St. Albans, Laurelton, Springfield Gardens. Now, I don't know what the context of this was, why they're saying this. Is this about the jury pool still? Maybe that's what they're saying. You want jurors from these neighborhoods because they're the quote unquote good black neighborhoods. But why is this being circulated around in the DA's office?
Right.
Let's not forget, this is the government we're talking about. We keep talking about that, right? How it becomes more important when the government is acting. We talked about the churches earlier. The government is giving them tax subsidies, and therefore the government is involved in some way. This is the DA, the district attorney. This is the government, right? We are entrusting them to do the right thing in the criminal justice system. Why are they circulating notes titled Good Black Neighborhoods? Right.
And there was another point on there. What was it? It said something about Greeks as well.
Oh, yes. They said Steinway. What did it say? Hold on. Let's find this here.
Greeks drop everybody.
Greeks drop everybody. So I believe what they're saying there is similar to the Italian situation,
right,
where they're saying that they don't want to put Italians on the jury if the defendant is Italian, because they think that the Italian jurors are more likely to acquit. I think they're saying Greeks drop everybody. I believe what they mean by drop everybody is they acquit everybody. I think that's what they're saying. So they're saying don't put a Greek on the jury. And they're not even saying don't put a Greek on the jury if the defendant is Greek. They're saying Greeks drop everybody, right? So they don't want to be period.
Right. And why did the Jews get crossed out? Well, why didn't their note stand? Why did they cross it out? I mean, why did the Italians get singled out? How are they determined to be good black neighborhoods? Oh. But let's also, again, this is nuance. Let's not pretend like this type of discourse does not happen.
Right.
In marketing, in political campaigns, in advertising, when you're trying to get the best either return on investment, or you're trying to get the result that you want, people talk about groups in generalities like this. It's very common.
Sure.
So
it's out there. But I think when you see it in the files of the district attorney's office, it gives you pause, right? Yeah. And I think maybe then that leads us to question, should this be out there? Like you said, it's something that people talk about, and maybe we're just used to it as a society. But if you see it in official documents, you see it in government files, and you think, oh my God, that shouldn't be in there, that's terrible. Maybe that's a signal, even maybe from our subconscious, that it shouldn't be anywhere. because we're able to recognize it when we see it in the context of government, but we're used to it in other contexts. But maybe we shouldn't be, right? Because if it shocks the conscience in this context, maybe it should be troubling everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
The complaints here call on a grievance committee to conduct an immediate and thorough independent investigation into the jury selection practice, citing smoking gun documents like the one that we showed, which reflected a detailed, dehumanizing ranking system that typed jurors by race, sex, religion, ethnic background, class, and neighborhood. That file and the admission that these notes were used during at least 2 cases in 1990 prompted the DA Katz's conviction and review unit to support the reversal of 3 convictions. So,
wow. So that was very, very serious.
Yeah. So it's already resulting in reverse convictions. And like I said, that is a type of remedy that you can pursue, even if you can't, as of now, sue the prosecutor. If the prosecutor does something wrong like that, you still do have recourse. You can, importantly, get your conviction reversed.
So let me, as egregious as it is, as it sounds, and as it looks on the paper, how is this just not good jury selection strategy? If your experience says,
right,
Italians are not going to prosecute Italians, so we want to get this guy prosecuted. Yeah, we're not going to we're not going to select Italians in the jury. How is that not just good strategy?
Well, for it to be good strategy, you have to accept the premise that all Italians, or most of them, I suppose, are going to act like the ones that you've seen in your experience.
Right.
Which is the discriminatory aspect of it. That's why we don't have allowances for discrimination when it comes to jury selection, because they are based on the premise that, yes, every member of this ethnic group is going to behave the same way.
Right. And I asked that just to get that said, right? Because, again, it's, we want to look at it from different angles.
Yeah.
We want to see that. But, yeah, it does rely on this, maybe a stereotype or discriminatory aspects of it. So,
right. It could be the case that more Italians than not, I'm not saying it is true or not, but let's say it was. Let's say it was the case that more Italians than not would acquit someone who was also Italian, right? If that was true, if that stereotype happened to be true, doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it a reason to pursue that strategy. Maybe, strictly speaking, that would be a good strategy if you somehow knew that the data supported that assertion. But even if that were the case, should it be allowed? Because you're still discriminating.
right. Absolutely. So, yeah, that'll be an interesting poll, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning that jurors do get taken off for all kinds of reasons. And yes, oftentimes they are discriminatory. Usually they're not going to tell you that's what it is, because they know that is a violation. And so usually they're more clever about, I guess they didn't want these internal files to be leaked, but it would be, we don't want you on a jury for whatever reason. We think your shirt is too colorful or whatever, right? But there might be a hidden agenda behind it.
Right. Absolutely. So, interesting.
Yeah.
But I think you would expect if, as you mentioned in the article, that 3 cases have already been affected because of it. It's probably something a little bit deeper than just looking at the notes that we've seen in the article.
Right. And I think it's a matter of the culture too, right? In these offices that needs to be re-examined.
That too. Yeah. And I think some of that even comes down to win at all costs type of mentality, whatever it is, even if you know that this is a violation or whatever, it's like, okay, but still we got to win. So,
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think lawyers, especially if they're in litigation in any form, even if it's a criminal trial, they want to win. They're programmed that way. They want to win at all costs, but they really need to take a step back sometimes and try to ask why they're there in the first place. What is their job really? I understand there's probably pressure from above for them to win. And you even said yourself, like in Japan, for example, prosecutors won't even bring a case unless they know they're going to get a conviction. So now imagine you're in Queens, you bring a case, you're in a similar type scenario where you think, okay, I've got the evidence, I'm going to get this conviction, and I don't have to worry about any heat from anyone, my bosses or the public, because I know I'm solid. You kind of hype yourself up to believing that this is a winning case. You're definitely not going to lose it. You're going to get an inevitable conviction here. And then something comes up that should make you take a step back and reconsider what you're doing. I can see some people being caught up in that moment and thinking, no, I got to go for it. I got to win this case. If I lose the case, it's going to be an effect on my reputation. Maybe I might get fired or disciplined from my boss. They're going to say, how can you bring in cases that you're not winning? Are you prosecuting people? Maybe then they might think that there'll be accusations of misconduct because they think that they brought a case that wasn't worthy of being prosecuted. And so they'd rather just suppress that information. Like, it's certainly wrong, right? And we need to be cracking down against it, but you can understand how someone might feel that way.
Sure, absolutely. And like you said, like, even they just get caught up in it. Like, I've got to win. I'm this far in. I can't back out now. And yeah, Japan, I mean, Japan's famous for having a 99% conviction rate. And it's because they only bring cases that they know that they're guaranteed going to win. And some of it involves some coercion, into confessions and whatnot. But yeah, there needs to be, it needs to be looked at. That shouldn't be the culture.
Right. So what would happen in Japan typically if the prosecutor discovered exculpatory evidence during the trial?
I don't know.
Hmm.
I wouldn't want to say. I mean, anything I said would be speculation.
Yeah.
But just from the culture and the immense pressure that they would probably be under, I'm sure someone would be tempted to hide it.
Yeah,
but I think that would be anywhere if
right.
pressure from people above, from
Exactly.
whatever. But I couldn't guarantee what would happen.
Right. We don't want to create the impression that even here it happens all the time either. I mean, obviously we are concerned with this culture that we're seeing, and we think that there needs to be more accountability, and we think it's a problem. But we don't want to act like it's automatic, right? Like every prosecutor is automatically going to disregard exculpatory evidence. No, it does happen where something comes out that proves someone is innocent and the person is rightfully let go. That's how it's supposed to work. The problem is that it doesn't happen as often as it should be happening, which is 100% of the time in that case. If you can prove that the person is not guilty, or, the exculpatory evidence might not be the end all be all of the case either, right? It could just be something that tends to maybe support their alibi or whatever it is. It could be like a small piece of it, but whatever it is, that should come to light and not be suppressed.
Absolutely. And on the other side of it, it should be normalized that, if something like this comes up, that people can switch gears and let go of the case. Like, so you don't have to keep moving forward. So like a prosecutor can be like, oh, wow, Your Honor, new evidence that came up.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be something that's prosecutable now, so we might have to withdraw the case. And it should be okay. It should be like a strike against them. The idea should be to make sure we get the fairest outcome for the people involved.
Right.
And
that should be okay from everyone, right? No one should have a problem with that. The DA, the higher ups, they should be cool with that too. In fact, it should be more than okay. That should be celebrated. I think possibly what ends up happening sometimes is they may feel like that was evidence that they should have had in the first place. People will say to them, how could you miss that? Like, it's one thing if something just pops up and there was no way they could have known about it, right? It's just like new information that nobody knew. But if it was something that was out there or that they should have reasonably found and they didn't, they overlooked it, they can see that as a reflection on their judgment too.
Well, mistakes happen. I think that ultimately everyone should be concerned with, are we locking up someone who's innocent? Regardless if we lose the case or win the case, ultimately, are we putting someone away, holding someone responsible for something that they didn't do? And even if it's a mistake that I made and not bringing certain information, or I read something wrong, like, ultimately that should be held to the highest standard. That should be the marker there.
Yeah, I agree. What was that saying? It's better to let 10 guilty people go than wrongfully lock up one innocent person.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah. So whether a guilty man go free something like that. But yeah, that's the that's the gist of it.
Put very poetically, yeah.
You can't get fooled again. No.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So, and I think people would have more trust and faith in the system. That would go a long way if they saw that side, or if that was the normalized version of things.
Yeah. And so, like everything else, is on us to hold people accountable to this.
Right.
Because we can't expect change to happen on its own. You need agents of change. And really quickly, before we wrap up, I wanted to mention the Queens Link rally that we did last week, because that also was in the spirit of holding folks accountable and seeking the change that we desire. And yes, it was a very successful event. I was pleasantly surprised because it was in Ozone Park. And in Ozone Park, it is a harder sell to get people to come to talk about the Queens Link. In the Rockaways, easy, right? People have been talking about this particular right of way for years. It used to be the Rockaway Beach Line. Their commutes are some of the worst in the whole country. So anything about transportation and this project, you'll get a lot of excitement on the Rockaways. That's why we started off in October with the big rally in the Rockaways. But to try to expand now, to take this to the public in other areas, it's more difficult. And I know there's been some criticism even about, well, how come the Rockaway Beach Line advocates have focused so much on the Rockaways historically? And even the name of the project, it was the Rockaway Beach Line. That's what people called it for the longest. We came up with Queens Rail and now Queens Link as a way, an effort to be more inclusive and to really illustrate that this affects neighborhoods throughout Queens and throughout the city. And so that's really what we've been trying to do, but it's difficult because people in Ozone Park, people in Woodhaven may not be as mindful of it. They may not be thinking about it as much. It's not at the top of their list of priorities as transportation is to people of the Rockaways. And transportation really is crucial, right? The further north you go, the less people are thinking about it, but there really should be, because our job is to show people how it doesn't only help the Rockaways, it helps everyone. And even in Ozone Park, it does take time off of commutes, not only to the city, it provides more interconnectivity within the borough. And so we experienced that. We had a student come up to me, in fact, talking about he goes to high school right off Metropolitan Avenue. He said that if you had a train station there, he can go from Ozone Park right to his high school on a train, 1, 2, 3. This is the north-south shot that's just not there now, right? There's no way to do that now. And so it's a beautiful thing for everyone. The fact that we were able to get a large attendance, what I would consider to be a large attendance in Ozone Park, I think is a beautiful thing. And I think that really speaks to, number one, the momentum that this project has been building up, because you're not just seeing people on the Rockaways interested in it anymore. And number two, the work that the Queens Link team, and that's not me, that's the volunteers in the group who are spending time in the neighborhood. And I've been helping them. I actually was able to reach out to the principal of this particular school and hook up the venue. And I've, of course, been reaching out to all the community leaders in Ozone Park and elected officials, and I've been bringing in everyone to the extent possible. I've been using my network to help the group. But the group members, other than me, have been very good at going around, canvassing the neighborhood, and just making sure that the word is out about the Queens, like the social media, Twitter, press releases, Facebook, all that, Reddit, it's been everywhere. And yes, to see this in Ozone Park, and you can watch the link on, the video is on my Facebook page, you can see it. We did a beautiful town hall where people were able to ask questions. And also we gave a presentation of new renderings of what the design might look like for the project, and showed where we are in it right now and what needs to happen. And a big part of this is more political pressure. And that really entails going out into the neighborhoods as we've been doing and getting the people on board, because whatever happens with this right of way, this abandoned train line, the people should speak on it. It shouldn't be a decision made behind closed doors by a select few. The entire borough should get to weigh in on it. And so that's what we're doing. We're taking this to the people, and I'm really happy to see them responding.
Absolutely. It sounds like it was a good event. And that's, like you said, very positive.
Yeah.
Last question, though, is Ozone Park one of the good B neighborhoods?
Wow. Well, it's not on the list. Ozone Park is predominantly Hispanic and South Asian at this point. South Ozone Park actually has an Italian neighborhood, so that might apply to the other memo there.
The other criteria.
But yeah, I don't see South Ozone Park. I would put on why would we say that? Yeah, it's offensive that this list even exists, right? Yeah. But the fact that South Ozone Park is left off is also offensive.
They're not a good. They're not a
Yeah,
good
it's not-
neighborhood.
right. So was that on the bad B neighborhood? I mean, come on, what are you doing?
What are they doing?
Yeah.
So
But no, we need to bring this fight to all the neighborhoods, right? Especially the ones served by the right of way. So the right of way begins in Ozone Park and it goes up to Regal Park. We need everything in between, and we need even in neighborhoods that are outside the direct right of way, because it affects, like I said, it affects everyone. Everyone should have a say as to what happens to this transit asset.
absolutely.
With that, I think it's time for the bottom line.
Well,
I got a bottom line.
huh?
I got a bottom line.
You got a bottom line?
Yeah, don't believe everything you read online.
Oh,
People were hitting me up saying that Wikipedia said that I was a candidate for city council this year. The councilwoman apparently went to a meeting in Glendale saying that I was running for city council this year. I never said it. Now, to be fair, I set up a committee, which is what you're supposed to do if you want to take steps to even put yourself in a position to run for office, because when you launch a campaign, you should have resources ready to go. And legally, you can't raise money or spend money without having a committee file. That doesn't commit you to petitioning and to actually running. That's just what you're supposed to do to prepare yourself for the possibility. With that said, did I ever announce I was going to run this year? No, but someone said, well, Wikipedia said it, so it must be true. Guy, don't believe everything you see online.
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. What really should have happened is they should have looked for, after hearing that, they should have looked for an announcement online from you.
People contacted me directly and said I was running. And I said, no, I haven't made up that decision. I'm looking at everything, but that's not something I've committed myself to. I've got the committee, but I haven't committed myself to petitioning and to running. People would argue with me. They would say, no, but Wikipedia says you are. They think Wikipedia is a more reliable source than the person whose decision it is.
Right. Yeah. So, yes. Bottom line, don't believe everything that you hear, or see, or
What was it? Yeah, so that's another one of those sayings, right? It's
Jay-Z.
like half of what you see.
Come on, it's the Jay-Z line.
No, but okay, but did Jay-Z have it right, or did he flip it in some way?
He said it was something about don't believe all of what you see or half of it.
Half of what you hear.
Even if it's spat by me.
Well, right. But what is the actual saying? I think it's don't believe everything you see and half of what you hear. Is that the real saying?
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, don't believe everything that you see and even less of what you hear. I don't know.
That sounds like we're going to go with that.
Yeah.
If not, that's the new one right now.
We paraphrase our idioms.
Right.
You can't get fooled again.
You can't get fooled again. Yeah.
So
Lixa, we don't know why. We don't know why.
You don't know why?
Yeah. She's like, why would she say that if you didn't announce? It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. Well, you have to ask. Listen, if I answer that question, then I'm guilty of what I'm saying people shouldn't do, right? You have to ask that person who said that, not me.
Yeah, right.
Unless it's on Wikipedia, because we know Wikipedia is like the end all be all. It's the ultimate source for everything.
So let me ask you now, is Wikipedia going to be changed after this?
I don't know. I didn't put it there in the first place. I hope it's changed, but
After this, I'm going to check Wikipedia to find out if you're telling me the truth right now or not. Because if I go there and Wikipedia still says you're running, then that means I guess you were not telling the truth.
It's funny that, and I don't want to really fault people. I'm kind of teasing a little bit.
Sure.
It's just funny to me that someone would actually say, no, Wikipedia says it. Therefore, now I got that from multiple people too.
Right.
They were upset. And to be honest, I think there were people who wanted me to run. So they were trying to say, hey, look, it's out there. It was announced already. And I was like, oh, hold up. And they're like, no, it's out there. It's out. Like they were just trying to push that.
It's out there. You might as well do it. It's out there now.
Yeah.
Get into it. So, but yeah, good bottom line, I think.
Yes.
Take things with a good, always verify verify the information that you're getting. Look for various sources, whatever. Especially these days when we're looking at anyone can write something online. Anyone can have a blog online. We've got issues with deep fakes. We've got AI that can generate things in people's tone. We can clone people's voices. We can do change facial structures on people to make people look like they're saying something they didn't. Like, always try to back up what you're hearing before buying into it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is something that I've seen a lot over the past few months. I almost think that people don't want to believe someone in politics because they think that they're going to be coy about it. So like whatever, sometimes like they get in their heads what they think the person is going to do, and they believe their own ideas or other people's thoughts over even that person because they think that a politician is not going to be honest. I think there's some of that too, unfortunately.
Sure. So with that being said, we're coming to a close on another week. Check us out on YouTube at Nuance Show. Go there, comment, like, follow, all of that. If you're into podcasts, definitely subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, wherever you get podcasts. Instagram, hit us up on Instagram. Answer some of the poll questions, or give us a follow on some comments. We always are appreciative that you decide to join us on these Tuesdays nights. Super awesome, and thank you very much.
As always, we've got work to do. We'll catch you next week.